Three, two, one. The heck was that?
That was really weird. Wait, I don't know why that happened.
All right. Three, two, one. What did you do to your computer?
Reality.
Therapist perception.
Bachelorette. Hello and welcome back to Reactivity TV. I'm Amy Albero and I'm a licensed therapist.
I am Chris. I am not a licensed therapist, but I have opinions about this show, and sometimes she lets me speak them.
And we're definitely going to get into all of your opinions and my takes as well. But before we do, please hit that like button at the bottom of this video and also make sure that you're subscribed to our YouTube channel. It's a small thing that actually goes a really long way, and we really appreciate it.
Yeah, and please also hit that bell icon so that you're notified anytime we post new content to the channel.
All right, so before we get into everything that happened on week 5 of the Golden Bachelor, what'd you think? What'd you think of this week's episode?
Well, before we get into the episode, I actually want to bring up something real quick. So I was looking at the analytics because I just figured out how to do that on our videos. And it appears that there is a small yet very vocal group of individuals that really are defensive of Gerry and do not like our criticism of him.
Well, we have been more critical of Gerry the last 2 weeks, for sure.
Well, so that brings up the question I have is, have we been too critical, do you think?
I don't know. What do you think?
No. I think we've been actually remarkably fair, right? But that being said, I actually felt, I don't know how you felt, we haven't talked about the episode yet, but I felt a lot better about the way Gerry handled himself in this particular episode. Overwhelmingly, I do think there was like 1 or 2 things that I would have maybe tweaked or changed, but you know, in the moment, you know, there's a area for forgiveness there in terms of not handling everything perfectly well. But compared to what we've seen the last 2 episodes, I thought he was kind of back to form what we saw early in the season. And that is not me pandering to those small minority of
We're hitting that dislike button
of viewers.
Yes, it's the like button, please.
Yeah.
But listen, so here's the thing. We both genuinely like Gerry, and I don't think we need to have an all or nothing take on it. And maybe that's what the internet is responding to. And I think just that concept of kind of holding both that we can really like Gerry, and we can also not like things about the way that he is engaging in his journey and the choices that he's making. Like, it doesn't need to be all or nothing, and we don't feel that way. It's not like we're like, you know, cancel Gerry or like we don't like Gerry. I've not liked some of his choices, and so I think it's important that all of us allow for like a nuanced take of just people in general, and not necessarily just take a one person does one thing that I don't agree with and therefore I'm out. Like, that's not the way, hopefully, in the world we want to operate, and that's certainly not the way that we are intending it to be. Like, overall, we're pretty high on Gerry and don't love every choice he's making.
So how often do you think this comes up with clients in therapy, where you have to sort of, you know, bring awareness to the fact that somebody may be doing this sort of like all or nothing type of mentality on an individual or a situation?
I don't know if that's a real question, but it feels like so much of what we do as therapists is notice, observe, challenge some of that all or nothing thinking. And it makes sense that we do that as humans. Like, we want to categorize things, and it's simpler and easier for us to put something in good versus bad, yes versus no. It's a lot more complicated and complex for things to kind of sit in that gray area. It's difficult to tolerate, and that's what, you know, a lot of what therapy is getting people more comfortable in the middle, in the gray area of, again, this nuance of life. Things aren't so simple as all or nothing.
You hear that, internet? So let's get into the show itself. Want to start with the summary?
Do you want to start with the summary?
No, I want you to start with the summary.
Sounded like you were going to take the lead there.
I know my place. Sidekick. Stand in until Catherine's ready to return.
We miss you, Catherine. Okay, so I have to say, this was probably one of my favorite episodes of Golden Bachelor yet, or maybe just in a while. And we saw a lot of really, really genuine moments this week. And we start out with 6 women. We just had a rose ceremony. We know we're going into hometowns week. So we start out with 6 women, and then we learn pretty much right off the bat from Jesse that we're only going to have 3 women at the end of this episode. Only 3 women are going to hometown. So it's a pretty stressful week for the women and for Gerry. Gerry has a one-on-one date to give out, a once-in-a-lifetime one-on-one date, which he takes Faith on, and they have a pretty dreamy date. Gerry also takes the rest of the women on a group date where they embrace their inner child, and the women shoot their shot at the carnival. And then we end with a pretty devastating rose ceremony where Gerry sends 3 women home and decides which 3 women and their families he's going to meet next week.
Yeah, I didn't necessarily think that there were a lot of surprises with respect to what happened at the rose ceremony, but I do think that the path we took to get there was kind of interesting in this episode. I thought it was definitely one of the more concise and tight episodes. It did feel like a little bit of a return to an earlier form where we saw the women really that kind of community driven aspect to it, where they really were very, very supportive of one another. We didn't see a lot of cattiness or any sort of backstabbing, but we did see some moments of high anxiety, which I think we want to talk about and get into. But overall, yeah, I thought solid episode, good, entertaining, quality episode that felt a little bit more of a return to the earlier 2 or so episodes that we really liked.
Yeah, agreed.
Yep.
All right, so let's just jump right into this one-on-one date.
Yeah, Faith gets the one-on-one date. Now, we have seen Faith repeatedly over, it feels like production keeps panning back to her as the first impression rose every single time a one-on-one is declared. They pan to her and her like building anxiety. She really hasn't gotten a lot of time. Now, you had mentioned something early on that it's actually quite common when you have a male lead that the first impression rose getter will oftentimes go out early. And a lot of it, and I hypothesized it probably had a lot to do with the fact that men are object oriented. And once you're kind of out of sight, out of mind, it's very easy for men's minds to not multitask in such a way where they stay focused. So, I can understand why she's feeling like she needs to get time with him. And I understand kind of the anxiety, even though she did get the first impression rose. So I did love that this felt like the right time and moment for her to get that one-on-one opportunity and that one-on-one date, especially since we are just knocking them out fast. I mean, we're in episode 5 and they have eliminated, by the end of episode 5, he's eliminated 19 women.
Yeah.
That's just really, really just rocking through them. So I thought it was a good timing. The date itself, they go into a helicopter. They land that helicopter on a helipad on a yacht, and then they hang out, of course, in a hot tub on a yacht. There's a lot I liked about this date. We know that I tend to be very critical about the actual activities related to dates because I want them to, have an opportunity to have some sort of conversation and discourse in a meaningful way, while also engaging in activity that you can learn and about the other person in some way. I thought, the Leslie date last episode was just a terrible activity type thing with the ATV. But I love this, you're in the helicopter, you see how you're responding to her and heights and all this other stuff. But you still have the comms, you can communicate, and then you're on this boat in sort of a new environment. And yeah, I love the whole thing. What were your thoughts on the kind of the date activities?
Yeah, well, they refer to it as a once in a lifetime date. And I bring that up. That's the second time I mentioned it on this episode, mostly because it was so emphasized on the episode itself that it's this once in a lifetime date, and the women are having some insecurity around who he's picking for this and what meaning that has to bring Faith on this date. But the reality is, while it is a once in a lifetime date, it's a very typical Bachelor date. The helicopter to helipad to yacht to hot tub is quintessential
formulaic,
very formulaic. I've been waiting for this date all season. It's you know, kind of a rite of passage for a season. And but I think you're right. It does allow for conversation, deepening of connection. And one of the things that stuck out to me was how fearful of heights Faith was, and she was sharing that with him, and Gerry was so reassuring to her and saying, like, I've got you, I'm right here. And he really used kind of proximity and words of affirmation to give reassurance to her, and they were able to kind of work through that together. And then followed by, you know, having this really intimate moment on the yacht where Faith is telling more about her life and her experiences and essentially what shaped her into the woman she is today.
Yeah, I want to talk about that conversation a little bit, because we had said after episode 1, what are we doing here? Just wrap it up. Faith is clearly the one. In that opening episode, their chemistry was so apparent and just jumped out of the screen. It was so visceral, right? And then he's gone off and he's done these other things with these other women, and some of them have felt like, oh yeah, good connection there, but nothing has felt as strong as that opening moment. So at the beginning of this date, Gerry had his face to camera and he said something to the effect of, you know, Faith is really the wild card one. I don't really know where it all kind of falls, or I forget the exact words he used, but it was kind of like, as a viewer, I was very confused by this, because I was like, no, it's so clear and apparent that you guys have a great connection. And I do think it speaks to what you had said at the end of episode 1, where like sometimes it's just, you know, out of sight, out of mind, and things get a little complicated. He has all these relationships he's trying to manage. But when they sat down on the yacht and had a real conversation about things, again, the electricity between them, again, it's so apparent. And I said, that's exactly what we saw in episode 1. Here we are 5 episodes later. It's still there. I'm calling it now. Wrap this up. I mean, it's so clear, I think, to the viewer that his connection with her is deeper and stronger than it is with the other women. And she's much clearly more in line with what he kind of probably wants and needs, or we'll say needs, because I got some hypotheses about what he might want instead. But
yeah, well, you know, it's interesting. Gerry had said something at the end of this date that he had known that there was a physical connection or a physical chemistry there with Faith, but didn't really know if it was any deeper than that, and didn't know if there would be an emotional connection or any emotional compatibility there. And it seemed like in essentially taking her out of this box of just being this really attractive woman who he, you know, had fun, you know, kissing on the first day, that like he was able to actually see her for more of who she really was. And she let herself share that too. I mean, I'm with you. It feels like they have chemistry and compatibility in a way that we don't really see, at least on screen, with the other women, for sure.
So now you oftentimes speak about the difference between vulnerability and trying to pretend to be vulnerable with trauma dumps. Was Faith's part of the conversation here on the yacht a trauma dump, or do you think it was true vulnerability?
Okay, so this is a really good question, and I'm inclined to say this felt like genuine sharing, and I'm going to say that for a couple of reasons. One, prior to essentially going into the date, or at least this part of the date, Faith tells the camera, I really like Gerry, and I want to see if it could actually work outside of this. And that's something, as common sense as that actually seems, it doesn't often feel like on this franchise people are thinking outside of the show. And so it felt to me like she was sharing with him almost an explanation about what her life has been like, why she essentially has maybe made some choices she has made in her life, or has reactions that she has, or how she navigates relationships. It felt like it was not not necessarily transactional, like I'm going to tell you this story to get this rose. It felt like I want to tell you this so that you understand me and where I'm coming from and why this is really vulnerable for me and why it's difficult for me to trust things or why it's difficult for me to open up, because whenever I have been vulnerable in the past, it's kind of been thrown back in my face. And this is what, and so anyway, it became this, I just want to use this piece of information about my childhood trauma and growing up without parents and having a non-traditional path to help you understand me better and how I'm reacting to you. And that's why I felt like it was genuine and important, especially as we are getting toward closer and closer toward meeting families and continuing to deepen a relationship. So one thing that I did want to point out, though, is, again, this idea of trust that Faith had brought up, that being vulnerable in the past has not really worked out for her. And she had said what really attracts her to Gerry is that he's really different than the men that she has been attracted to, that he's more emotionally healthy than these other relationships that she's been in. And that's what's scary to her. And Gerry asks her to trust him. And he says to her, I'm not going to do that to you. And this is the first of 2 times we see Gerry make a pretty big promise to a woman on this episode about something really vulnerable and about something that he can't really control. And so I'm feeling a little bit weary of what's going to happen next.
See, it's interesting that you took that take, because I came away from this conversation thinking like, this is the first time in 2 episodes where he didn't have a lot of I-centric type of conversation. It really did feel like he was in the moment with her and was genuinely listening and hearing her and wanting to, it was using words to suggest that it was about her when he was talking. And so I actually came away from the conversation, and again, you and I oftentimes disagree on the proper way to communicate in these ways. But yeah, I came away thinking like, oh, that was a better job than he's done over the last 2 weeks.
No, this isn't necessarily meant to criticize Gerry. It's more of like, I'm nervous, like I'm cautious. I believe that Gerry was so genuine in what he was saying. And it felt like he held this information so well and was there and supportive with her and responded in this genuine way of, I'm not going to do this to you, like kind of speaking in an absolute or making this, again, promise that he might not keep. I don't think it was manipulative at all. I'm not suggesting that. I'm more saying, like, when he said that, I was like, oof, that's a really big promise to make. When there's still at least 3 weeks left in this journey and we don't know what's going to happen. And then, whatever happens after that.
Yeah, I do want to bring up one thing that to make to a little bit more levity that Faith had brought up when they were in the car going to the helipad to get in the helicopter. She had asked him, had he done the whole internet thing? And they sort of like have a short conversation about it, and they kind of, she took the tone of, didn't say it in so many words, but basically was saying like, yeah, internet is hard and we're old and we can't deal with that stuff. And this is what I want to say, okay? Based on our analytics, a huge number of our viewers are 65 plus, especially, believe it or not, we have double the number of 65-year-old men than we have women watching. So those of you in your 60s watching or older, we appreciate you. Thank you for tuning in. Make sure to hit that like button, because clearly you do. You keep coming back. But I just want to point out that Faith may not have enough faith in those of her age demographic with respect to the internet, because our viewership analytics are suggesting that they're doing all right for themselves with the internet.
Okay, but can I make one comment? I know that 2 of those viewers are my mom and my dad. And my mom called me this week to ask, where is the bell icon that Chris keeps telling me to hit? Because I don't know where it is. And so I told her that you would walk her through how to.
Okay. Hit the bell icon. It'll be a weekend project.
Faith gets the rose, which means Gerry's going to her hometown and gonna meet her family, which I'm actually really excited to meet Faith's family.
Yeah, me too, because the way she talks about her past and the way that she presents herself, it makes you just wonder, like, what are we in for type thing. She just seems like such a wonderful human being. I would just imagine that she has spawned off some great offspring and some great progeny. So I'm interested to meet them.
Also known as kids.
Sure, progeny.
All right, so
you use your words, I use mine.
Okay, so one thing that is kind of going on back at the mansion while Faith is on this date is we see Leslie start to get emotional. She's having a really, really rough day, and she is talking to the camera about it, but also talking to the other women about it. And so that's, of course, kind of building as we get to the group date. I just want to take a quick pause to tell you that Revive is hiring. In our Miami and Pittsburgh offices, we have full and part-time W-2 and 1099 clinician positions available, and this includes both postgraduate and associate level licenses, in addition to fully licensed clinicians. In our Connecticut offices, we have full-time, fully licensed W-2 clinician positions available, including clinical supervisor opportunities. If you are interested in working for a company that values community, work-life balance, and your personal and professional growth, then we want to meet you. Find a link to our website in our bio. All right, so let's move on to the group date. The women and Gerry go to an amusement park, the carnival, and they are all about embracing their inner child. So what was your take on this date?
I was nervous actually at the beginning of this because, as we talked about before, I oftentimes am critical about the activities, but it really worked for me. Amusement parks are, they're busy, you're running around, you can't always hear stuff. The rides can be what they're going to be. But it seemed like Gerry did a really good job of, kind of carving off private time for each of the women, which he's down to a low enough number where he can do that. He took, one of at least one ride with each one, and not like the tilt-a-whirl, like a legitimate, like a Ferris wheel or something where he could have a conversation with them. He had plenty of time together with them. He saw them in a little bit of a competitive spirit. He saw them, just kind of just messing around with games and stuff, which is fun. So I ended up actually really liking this activity, even though I went into it a little weary about how it could play out. I thought it was well executed, really, and that's credibility to production and to Gerry himself. The most noteworthy thing, and I just keep thinking back to Bachelor in Paradise, the first rose ceremony with the girls. It's like, we just kept saying, like, these three girls, why are they not shooting their shot? They're going home in 3 hours. This is a perfect example where, all 5 of the remaining women, they took their shot, and they went hard. So, I've got some thoughts about each one of them, which I kind of want to talk about and see if you had similar interpretation. So I'm just going to rattle them off very quickly, my thoughts, and you respond to whichever you think is most interesting. But I thought, Teresa, I thought Gary's responses felt a little forced to me, not really authentic. I think he cared and wanted to be genuine, but it just didn't feel, it feels like to me, his interest in her has waned. Susan, it felt like they both knew that this is the end of the road and they're just enjoying it. It felt like Ellen felt like a little desperate to me. Like she, and even in the face cameras, she was coming across as quite kind of desperate, like, and I felt that. Sandra, which, by the way, sorry, Sandra, we've been calling you Sandra.
Sorry, Sandra.
Yeah. That was a little bit forgettable for me. It just didn't, there was no chemistry. There's no spark there. And I think we've seen that, and that's why we didn't really like her getting a rose last time. Leslie completely breaks down. And to me, the way I interpret it was Gerry just had absolutely no idea how to handle that, really. And I thought he just sort of was like fumbling in the dark looking for a light switch, is kind of what it felt like to me. I think he got there and he did all right, all things considered, but it just felt real awkward to me. So those were my takeaways from the 5 shots that got taken. So I'd love to know, where am I right? Where am I wrong? What were your insights?
Well, I don't think there's, like, again, to go back to the thesis of this episode, there's no right or wrong here. Although, don't quote me on that later when when we're arguing or something. I
have that recorded now.
I am on the same page with you about Susan and Sandra, and I do think, like, they probably have a really nice friendship with Gerry. And if that's what kind of comes out of this, then that's great. Or if they came out of this with a friendship with the other women or having a great experience, that's great. But I think it is clear that, like, the romantic connection wasn't there. So Teresa, wow. Okay. So on the one hand, she's talking about the fact that it has been 52 years since she has told a man that she's falling in love with him. And so I'm imagining how overwhelming this must be for her and how complicated it must be to have these feelings again. And she has said that she, you know, hasn't been able to get there with anyone else. But then, I mean, you used the word desperate before in terms of Ellen, but there, it seemed like this sense of desperation or maybe anxiety or something for Teresa bubbled up when she was talking with him and saying like, I can't live without you, Gerry. I really think this could work. I mean, it was overwhelming to listen to as a viewer. And you can see that Gerry seemed to be a little bit overwhelmed as well. And he was saying like, oh my, that's really nice of you to say, like in his very polite manner. And he was kind of reassuring her when she was saying like, I really, really think this could work. And he was like, oh yes, like this could work. And so I was a little bit like, eek, like maybe you like shot your shot a little too strong there, Teresa. But we then see Gerry kind of say to the camera that he has really strong feelings for her back, which again kind of surprised me.
Back, and, you mean in return? In
return, I'm sorry.
I mean, she has a wonderful back too, but I'm
Thank you. Yes, he has really strong feelings for her in return. He reciprocates strong feelings, and that Teresa is the picture of safety and security, which I thought was a really important note. So I was kind of feeling overwhelmed by what Teresa was saying, but I think that in therapy we refer to that as maybe a parallel process that or somewhat of transference in a way where me feeling overwhelmed by what Teresa is sharing might mirror what she is feeling or maybe what Gerry is feeling in terms of receiving the information. So that's the Teresa situation. Then we go on to Ellen. Ellen also, I had a big like, wow, like you really want love, like you really want to be in love, you want to find a partner. And there is a part of me that wonders, and Ellen seems wonderful. And I know that there's like a ton, I mean, there's tons of many of these women's fans, but Ellen has a strong fan base. And I get it. Like she seems like such a genuine, amazing woman.
And she is a true fan of the, she is a Bachelor Nationette. Yes. Like through and through. Yeah. Unlike a lot of the other women on the show who like maybe have seen a show or two or an episode, but didn't really know it coming in. And so I'm sure that endeared her to the audience just as a result of that.
Yeah. And listen, I think that there is a piece of for all of these women in some way, like being at this point in life, right? Like I just said, Teresa hasn't fallen in love with a man in 52 years. Ellen saying it's been like 8 years since she was having these feelings. And I could imagine that when you meet someone who is great, Gerry's amazing, you might want it to work for the sake of it working rather than like the actual connection that's there itself, because it really felt to me like Ellen wasn't receiving the cues or the signals that Gerry wasn't quite there. I think that her infatuation with Gerry and potentially just really, really also just wanting to be in a relationship might have like gotten in the way of her being able to see or read that she and Gerry weren't quite on the same page.
Yeah, this comes back to what I've said many times. It's that junior high, early high school thing where, you know, my infatuation is sort of driving the ship and not realizing that infatuation is actually the antithesis of love. It's a selfish thing. And it feels like she's sort of caught in that, like, I desperately want to be in love and I desperately want, you know, X, Y, and Z, and you're a good guy and I can make you fit into that box. And this is what I've kind of said at the very beginning with Ellen. It was one of the big problems I had is she seems like a wonderful woman. It doesn't feel to me like Gerry is the person she loves or cares about or wants. He just happens to check some boxes and she can find a way to fit that body into the you know, space that she's looking to fill. And it's not necessarily that he's the right person for her necessarily.
Right. And people do that all the time.
All the time. Yeah.
Especially when like there's this theory from Sex and the City, the cab light being on, the taxi cab light being on, that sometimes it's a matter of just like being ready. And once you're ready, once your light is on, then like whoever might come across your path that again kind of fits into a certain number of boxes, that might be the one you identify as the one. And it seems like maybe for Ellen, like her cab light is on, that she's kind of ready for a relationship. And so she might be leaning into maybe a little bit of confirmation bias here in a search for her partner. I want to spend some time and talk about Leslie.
Yes.
Okay, so as I alluded to, Leslie had a pretty emotional day leading up to it, and she talks to Gerry about it, which I thought was great, that she was vulnerable and she was sharing with him where her head and where her heart were at. And she tells him that when he took Faith on the date, it brought up feelings from previous relationships in which she was cheated on. And the idea of not feeling chosen. Here's that theme again. It's coming up a lot this week.
Mm-hmm.
And that it wasn't anything that he specifically did, but that the situation itself triggered these feelings of feeling insecure and, again, not chosen. So here's the second occurrence of Gerry sort of potentially over-promising.
Mm-hmm.
Leslie is talking with him about this. And she says to him, referencing the date that they had last week, no one has ever looked back and made me feel protected, referencing when they were on the ATVs and Gerry looked back to make sure that Leslie was okay. And he said, I always will. And again, we have one of these extremes again. But you just promised something very significant to Faith that we all heard. And now you're making this big promise to Leslie.
And they are absolutely 100% mutually exclusive.
Yes. And then Leslie leans in and says, I'm falling in love with you. And he responds, you're my girl. And the way I gasped, it was giving Ben Higgins from his season.
So I didn't watch Ben Higgins' season, or really any other seasons other than this one. So can you give me some context to what is giving Ben Higgins mean? Like, did she literally just hand him Ben Higgins on a?
Okay, so Ben Higgins is a Bachelor Nation fan favorite, arguably one of the best. I would say
Was he the Hannah Montana of the Hannah Brown? Was he the Hannah Brown of the Bachelors?
Same but different. I mean, definitely like an America's sweetheart in male form. I mean, just people love Ben Higgins. He's just sweet Midwestern guy. He's like people have compared him and Gerry a lot in terms of like that kind of just like a good guy. So he is down to his final two and so it's like getting down to it. And his final two are Lauren and JoJo. And while on a date with JoJo, she says, I am falling in love with you. I love you. And he says, I love you too. And she's like, wait, you're not supposed to say that. This was the first time we ever saw a Bachelor lead tell anybody prior to the proposal that they loved them.
Well,
like,
did he pick her?
No.
Ooh, that one hurts. That one hurts.
So he told Lauren also, I mean, he proposed to Lauren. So
I'm gonna guess and say they're not still together.
They are not. They're both happily married to other people.
Yes, yeah. That one would hurt. Yeah.
It did.
Yeah.
So that was like unspeakable at the time. Like,
and the JoJo girl even specified, like, no, Ben, you can't do that. Like, there's a script here, and that's off script.
That's not on it. Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
JoJo is probably the best Bachelorette of all time.
You got a lot of best Bachelorettes.
Caitlin Bristow and JoJo were the holy grail of Bachelorettes.
Okay, I think you mean the Holy Trinity. The Grail is a cup.
The holy something.
The Grail is a chalice. Yeah, it's something you drink out of.
So did you not hear Gerry say, "You're my girl"?
I mean, I did, but it didn't really hit me that way because
"You're my girl."
Well, back up here. Okay, I was
"You're my girl" too. That's not me.
All the other girls. No, I mean, one of the things, so she had, dropped the L bomb, right? And my focus was on Gerry, don't say you love her back. Gerry, don't say you love her back. He's like, oh, you're my girl. I'm like, oh, good job. You avoided
No,
that. You avoided.
he insinuated he's going to pick her.
Listen, as you say it, I understand that, and I do. But I'm gonna just be honest. I would have. You'd be yelling at me if I were the Bachelor right now too, because I totally. I looked at that and was like, Gerry, good job. You avoided the L trap there. You did a good job. You ducked and weaved. And meanwhile, you're like, oh my God, Gerry, bad Gerry.
Listen, at this point, I haven't listened to any commentary on this episode, and I will of course listen to all of my Bachelor recap podcasts. But please, in the comments, can you weigh in here? Is it? And this is an all or nothing. Is it me who's right or Chris?
I honestly, I just think from the guy perspective, we know that the value.
He's just trying to be a nice guy.
Yeah, I think that guys are programmed to believe
you
that.
understand how that's mean though, right?
No, well, I understand that you say it, but guys don't think that way. No, you have to remember something. Guys are programmed to like understand. We're like, we know that the word love is so meaningful to a woman, and we also know that there's a lot of men out there that will just throw it around willy-nilly just for manipulation purposes. And so good guys like Gerry are really only going to use the love, when it's really true and accurate and fair. And as a guy, you're very conscious of that. And a lot of times you're like, okay, I'm going to duck and weave around that until I really, really mean it. If you're a really good guy. And I just felt, to me, like I watched him and be like, okay, ducking and weaving. He's doing what he needs to do to get out of that corner. And I think it's just one of those things where I think the average guy would watch that and he's like, doesn't really see what was wrong with it, because he avoided like the big pit trap. Meanwhile, we don't realize that we got caught into another trap that we didn't even see that was beyond the first one. And that's kind of what it feels like. I hear you and I understand, and I fully get what you're saying. And I understand as I step back and look at it, like, oh yeah, I understand. But yeah, I would have made the same mistake. I absolutely would have made the same mistake.
A little role play for a second.
Ooh. I mean, can I leave the cameras running?
I'm falling in love with you.
I think you're really, really great and really pretty. And I think it's possible I could get there with you.
Saying I could get there with you is very on brand for Bachelor. So I think you passed.
Bam. Bachelor 96. What season is Bachelor up to?
I don't know. It's a lot.
It's a lot, yeah.
You have to be single to be on The Bachelor, though, so you can't actually be The Bachelor.
That's not true. That guy who ended up winning was not single.
Oh, you're talking about Hannah Brown's winner.
Yeah, that wasn't Tyler Cameron, right?
No, correct.
Okay.
He
got on there and he wasn't single.
Well, nobody knew that at the time, but that is true.
Yeah, well,
Okay, so we have this thing that Gerry now told Leslie, and for all we know, she's walking in thinking, it's me. I got the next couple weeks in the bag.
In fairness, I think we all thought she was top 3 anyways. So
yeah, but he told her you're number 1.
I can understand how she might interpret that. But I didn't interpret it that way.
This will be a moment I'm pretty confident that we will see them talk about on Women Tell All or After the Final Rose, if they do those.
Interesting. Okay.
It's that, for me, it's that meaningful of a moment. Whether he picks her and then you have Faith and Teresa watching that, or he doesn't pick her and she's reacting to being told, you're my girl, when he picks somebody else.
Okay. Well, I guess we will see what happens. I wonder if other people are going to take it as seriously as you did. Yeah.
So we do go to the cocktail party with 2 roses, because on the group date rose, Gerry was feeling so conflicted and so overwhelmed that he couldn't give out a group date rose, which was really meaningful and interesting to watch him navigate through, and also see the women's reaction to that.
Yeah, I actually thought this was a good call. For whatever reason, I just really didn't like the 1-1 and 1 out of 4 type situation. So I like that he pulled back, give it some time. I do think that there was a little bit of emotions were high on that date, and he was navigating a lot. And I could feel, I could see how he might feel a little bit emotionally trapped into picking one or two individuals over others, just because he is a sensitive guy and does clearly, as he's demonstrated past decisions, he clearly does let other people's emotions guide his hand sometimes. So I really thought that this demonstrated a little bit of growth by holding back and saying, I'm going to sleep on this and not just make a rash decision like he did with the Kathy Rose, like he did with the Sandra Rose. So I like this decision a lot.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, and for him to have given a rose, it would have almost tied some sort of competition or meaning to what each of those, specifically those three women, told him. And that would have not really felt good, or seemed fair. That, and I'm referring to Ellen, Teresa, and Leslie. What they each shared was incredibly vulnerable, and I feel like all equally vulnerable, all equally personal, and deeply from the heart. And it just would have felt, in my opinion, like wrong or almost mean, to give a rose. And so I feel like very happy with his decision. I understand why he was feeling conflicted and overwhelmed.
Yeah, and the other piece of it too is I also felt from a pure drama perspective and suspense perspective, we would have basically known who number three is, right? Obviously Faith is one; she gets the private rose. He's got two roses left to give out, and the pool of women is exactly the same between the group date and the cocktail party. He gives one out in the group date. She's clearly ahead, however you want to use the the metric for who's ahead and who's behind. She's clearly ahead of the one who gets the rose at the cocktail party. And so I think from a production perspective, it also was just a better call by holding off.
Okay, so let's get into the rose ceremony.
Yeah.
As I said at the top, we had 6 women. Faith got the rose from the one-on-one, so we're down to 5 for the rose ceremony with only 2 roses left to give out. And not surprising to us, Gerry
called it last time.
Yeah.
We both thought that Sandra was going to be number 6. You thought Susan was 5. I thought that Ellen would be 5. You thought that Ellen would be 4. I thought that Susan would be 4. So we both had the same top 3 getting eliminated. And
yeah, and so our 3 women going to hometowns, the families that we will meet next week, will be Leslie's, Teresa's, and Faith's.
Which one are you most excited to meet?
Honestly, I watched the preview for next week, and I'm I really couldn't tell the difference between, I couldn't decipher like whose kids could be whose, because these women all kind of look alike in some way.
A little bit, yeah.
But I'm really excited to meet all of them, and these hometowns are going to be a lot harder than the hometowns that we see in the other franchise settings.
It's not parents, it's kids. What do you think is harder to meet? You think it's harder to meat someone's kids or someone's parents?
Someone's kids.
Gotta be, right?
The grandkids were saying, like, I think you could be my pop. Like, how tough is that? Or even like getting the 3rd degree from one of their sons. Like, it's got to be tough.
But I think I'd be really anxiety ridden if I were trying to meet somebody's child.
Yeah. Is there any family that you're excited to meet?
So I'm interested to meet Faith's family, just because I really just want to see how that all developed. But in terms of the one that I'm like, I think it might just be like a little rubbernecking kind of a car crash type situation, is I really want to see Teresa's family, because she's such a kind of an odd bird in terms of her personality that it could go so many different ways. She's such a warm, genuine person, but she's also a little bit, a little something there, and so I'm very intrigued. I'm very intrigued to see her family among the 3.
Well, I think what would be really interesting is seeing these women in their like natural element, like actually seeing them as mothers and grandmothers. Like, we'll probably see a side to them that we haven't seen, and I think that will be really cool to see. And I feel like sometimes on the other parts of the franchise, the hometowns, like it still feels like kind of performative, where you can't really do that when you have these other like more prominent roles in your life. And so I think I'm really curious to see how Teresa actually is, within engaging with her family and whatnot. Like, I think we might see a little bit more maybe of a or maybe I'm hoping that we might see a little bit more of a grounded side of her in some way. I wonder if the environment is like creating some of this like nervousness.
Yeah. All right. So shall we roll into Rose and Thorn?
Yes.
All right. What do you got this week for your? Let's start with the Thorn.
Okay, so my thorn this week, I kind of already hit on it, but you might give me shit over here for saying it. Again, not a criticism of Gerry, just I just had anxiety around like these overstatements, these grand gesture type of statements. I understand where they're coming from. I think they felt genuine in the moment, but it like literally makes me nervous. And so that's my thorn. We need to be much more intentional with our words and have like foresight and forethought when making such significant statements
and promises
and telling people you're my girl when it's not down to the final one.
You're my girl.
Better be.
How do you know? Better be.
I mean, Susan. One thing that we actually didn't hit on when we were discussing is when Faith came back from her date and everyone was like, what did you do? And she was like, you don't really want to know. And they were like, no, we do. And she was like, are you sure?
Yes.
And then she went into the date in some detail, but that was my rose in like, are you sure you want to know?
Yeah.
And so and
they were very adamant about like, no, that's what we do around here.
Yeah.
Let us know. Yeah.
Yep. And so I really liked that from Faith in, again, being in the position. Again, that's a great empathy example of being in a position of not getting a one-on-one date, hearing about other people furthering connections, knowing what that feels like, and basically asking, again, are you sure you want to know this? It might suck to hear. So I thought that was such a high character moment from Faith.
Yeah, no, I agree. That was noteworthy to me as well. All right, so I want to start with my thorn. Okay. It's kind of a rose and a thorn. Okay. The thorn, I'm really sad to see Susan go. Love Susan. Okay. Now it's a 2-part rose for me because it means, Susan, call me. Let's break some boards together. All right. I'm available. I got to stretch beforehand, but I am available. You give me a call. Okay. And the rose B is, if you noticed during this episode, there were multiple shots where Susan was once again being the mother of the house, really consoling women who were getting emotional, and like at one point, I think it was Teresa, she literally had like Teresa in her arms at the amusement park. And it just, I didn't know what to expect with her on episode 1. And she has just grown into my favorite. There's something just so warm and genuine. I just really, really like her. And I hope she goes on to do wonderful things because I'm a big fan. I'm a big fan. Call me. We'll, break some boards together. Absolutely.
Susan, you're welcome anytime in our house.
Or on our podcast, you swing on by.
Yeah. Hey, we'd love to have you.
Can I do one more rose? We're gonna do it's all right. I also
3 roses. Wow.
3 roses. Yeah.
You are the Bachelor.
I'm like the Bachelor. Yeah. Right. I also want to give a rose to all of our 65 plus viewers who really showed up for us, and they're making up a huge swath of our viewership right now. And so thank you to all of you because we're trying to be successful around here, and you're helping us out. So yeah.
All right, so that wraps up the A side of our Reactivity TV this week. Make sure to check out the B side where we are talking about Bachelor in Paradise week 5. And this was another great episode.
Yeah.
So lots to talk through there. If you don't want to wait till next week to check in with us and see what we've got going on, make sure to follow us at Revive CFW on Instagram and on TikTok. You can follow me at Amy Alvaro LCSW. You can also check out our other podcast, Wishing You Well, which is all about helping you navigate your wellness journey. And you can find that over on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify. You can also check out our website, revivecfw.com. And we'll see you next time. Bye.
See ya.